If The Bunker had not been an Amnesia game, I'd be telling you that it was a solid horror game, well worth playing and well worth the money you would pay for it. It's very atmospheric, it's fun, and for the most part it's pretty scary, although it does sort of fade away towards the end. But it is an Amnesia game, and so I have to say, I was disappointed. It does not live up to the previous games, especially not Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Whilst it's, pretty fun to play, it is very atmospheric and kinda scary, it does not come close to being as terrifying as The Dark Descent. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't play it if you are into horror games. You should. It is a solid entry into that genre. I'm just saying it didn't quite meet my expectations. Essentially, I feel like they're taking the franchise in a direction that just doesn't work for me. Now, I will tell you at this point that I do seem to be the odd man out here. Everybody else is saying this game is the best Amnesia game ever made. It's the best and it's the scariest. So, my opinion seems to be the outlier. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I'm right and everybody else is wrong, because of course that is nonsense. It's just a simple case of what works for everyone else just doesn't seem to work for me. Of course, that then begs the question, why didn't it work for me? So in this video, I want to tell you the 5 things about Amnesia: The Dark Descent that really worked for me, that made that game so bone-chillingly terrifying, so utterly mind-numbingly horrific that I was left stunned for hours once I finally finished it. The first thing is atmosphere. Amnesia: The Dark Descent was absolutely brilliant at setting the mood, creating a stage upon which this horror masterpiece would unfold. The visuals, the art style, the audio, everything about it was just really well done. It constantly provoked feelings of being in an old Hammer horror movie, that sort of thing. And whilst The Bunker plays out on a very different stage, as it's set in World War I in an underground bunker, the atmosphere is superb. Again, the visuals, the art style, the use of sound, coming together to create a very claustrophobic, stressful and unnerving experience. They got this one right. No complaints here. The second thing I remember about The Dark Descent was this constant, unending slow drip fear. You never ever really felt safe. There were times you might feel a little less stressed or perhaps a little less hunted, but never actually safe or secure. You never felt like you were in a familiar environment that you knew well. You were always moving into the unknown. And whilst you did feel like you had agency, you never ever felt like you were in control. The Bunker, on the other hand, has a safe room. A room where you are quite literally safe from the monster. You can lock yourself in, and for a brief period you can relax. You can let the fear drain out of you, turn on all the lights and take stock of your situation, get your breath back and calm down. And you keep returning to this safe room over and over. And so as the game progresses, you become familiar with the map. You know where you're going, and more importantly, you know how to get back to the safe room when things go pear-shaped. And so you start to do things that you know will get you into trouble because you feel confident in your ability to get back to the safe room. You get a sense of control. And whilst it can be scary running from the monster, there is something different about the fear of just running away from something chasing you and the fear of crawling around slowly in the dark, never quite knowing if the monster's about to jump out. There is something almost cathartic about the monster finally appearing and you just running. It allows you to sort of almost bleed off the fear and the stress, especially once you get back to the safe room, lock it, turn on the light, and, think, ha! Beat you! The third thing that I remembered about The Dark Descent were the game mechanics were very simple and didn't really occupy much of my, brain power, so to speak. I didn't have to think about them very much. You didn't spend a whole lot of mental energy considering things like resource management, looking at your inventory, etc. There was a lantern, you did have to refill it, but it was very secondary to the core experience. The vast majority of your brain was focused on the two primary threats, the monster and the dark. And the thing that made dealing with these two threats even more stressful and terrifying is the fact that darkness was both an enemy and a friend at the same time. You see, the darkness was what you used to hide from the monster. But the longer you spent in the dark, the more the madness would creep upon you. It is a simple concept to understand, it doesn't really require much thought, but it was unbelievably hard to balance in the moment. Darkness is never comforting. You can't hide under a bed for half an hour and wait until the monster is completely gone before moving. You've got to get out of the darkness. It's like, hiding from a Tyrannosaurus Rex whilst covered in ants that are eating you alive. Now, the bunker also has a monster and it also has darkness, but it uses darkness in a slightly different manner. You want to keep the lights on because the monster hunts less when the lights are on, but once the monster is hunting, you definitely want to try and find somewhere dark, stay out of sight. And in those moments, darkness is your friend and you can stay there as long as you like, basically. Just collect your thoughts, come up with a plan, and just wait for your heartbeat to drop a little before making your move. There's no real pressure from the dark itself to get the hell out of it. But more importantly to me, in the bunker, I spent way more time thinking about mundane issues like my inventory. I was constantly worrying about how many things I could carry, what I was picking up, what I was leaving behind, what I was going to take out from the safe room with me, etc, etc. I was constantly going back to the safe room to store stuff in the chest. I was going through the walk of the looter routine. I was falling into these well-walked paths that we gamers walk. And there is something very relaxing about that. Focusing on mundane things tends to calm us. It tends to take our minds off the horrific imminent danger. We do this in real life. We train people for danger situations by giving them drills, by giving them mundane things they need to check, they need to tick off in their brain and do before the big event. This is partly because those things usually are things you should do in order to help survive the situation, but they're also there to calm the person down, to give them something to focus on whilst the danger is happening. This is true for firefighters, for soldiers, it's true for people jumping out of airplanes. You drill them into focusing on the mundane things that will help them survive rather than on the danger that might kill them. And it works in horror games too. If you're focusing on the mundane things that will help you survive the horror game, you're not focusing as much on the teeth waiting for you in the dark. The fourth reason I feel The Dark Descent worked so well for me was it embraced the less is more philosophy. I didn't actually see or have to run from the monster that often. In fact, in my playthrough, I can tell you now, I did not have to reload the game because I died to the monster a single time. I did not actually end up getting killed and have to reload because the monster caught me. I managed to avoid him for more or less the entire game, and it was scarier because of that. Compare that to the bunker, where I found myself hiding or running from the beast way more often. This is partly because he seems to just hunt you a lot quicker and a lot closer more often, but also because the game kind of encourages you to do things that will almost guarantee he appears. You find yourself thinking, alright, I will destroy that door, the beast will arrive, and I will run back to the safe room. And so you grow accustomed to having the beast chase you. It becomes kind of normal. And I realise this is probably one of those areas where maybe I'm the odd one out. Most people will find running from a beast trying to eat you much scarier than crawling around in the dark hour after hour worrying about what's out there, but that's just me. I found the Dark Descent to be so terrifying because I just didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know if I should hide. I didn't know if I should run. I had no plan. And I didn't even know what I was hiding from half the time. I was constantly stressed and terrified of seeing this thing. Whereas in the bunker, he was just kind of like a sparring opponent. He was someone that was definitely an enemy and I knew was a danger to me, but it was a controllable one. It was one I could deal with both mentally and functionally. And finally, the fifth thing that really stands out about the Dark Descent and the other Amnesia games to some degree is the simple yet deeply emotional narrative that those games had. It was a story that would pummel and drain you just as much as it would terrify you. I ended all of those games, especially the Dark Descent, an absolute emotionally drained and horrified husk. Compare that to the bunker, where I ended pretty much, well, peckish and slightly annoyed. It's not that the story was bad. It was okay. It was a fair story. There was a lot of little bits of lore that were hanging around, and it was interesting to read. It was definitely interesting, but there was nothing really emotional about it. I found myself caring about my survival, obviously, and there are a few other things you feel. I'm not going to spoil it, but there are a few other moments where you think, oh, well, that's a shame, oh, that's terrible. But the previous Amnesia games, honestly, towards the end, as the narrative unrolled upon you, the sweet oblivion of death would almost have been a welcome relief, because the story itself was so dark, so emotionally draining. You know, in the first game, you were facing the reality of your own past with abject horror, and in the other games, equally massive emotional hits. It was incredible, and this really added to the psychological aspect of this horror game. In the bunker, I was just a guy trying to survive, and I have to say, it was set in World War I. And you felt half the time that whilst, yeah, you were struggling for survival, it was almost no worse off than the struggle for survival that was going on above your head in the war, with the bombs constantly going off, letting you know people were still up there dying non-stop. And it wasn't a bad story, it didn't have the emotional impact that the previous Amnesia games had. At least, not for me. And so that's it. Those are the 5 things that made Amnesia: The Dark Descent work so well for me. And as you can see, 4 of them just were not really applicable to the bunker, which is why I feel it didn't actually work for me, especially in the latter half of the game. Oh, okay, right. I know I said there were 5 things that Amnesia: Dark Descent did well, and that's why it worked for me. There's a 6th. There is a 6th thing, okay? It had no boss fights. That's pretty important, at least none that I remember. Nothing stood out as being an obvious boss fight in an obvious boss fight arena. Now, some people are going to say, well, technically in the bunker, you didn't have to have a boss fight. There are ways to... Okay. I hear you. I understand all that. But if it walks like a boss fight, quacks like a boss fight, yeah, I'm going to treat it like a boss. Look, I didn't like the end, okay? I did not like the end of Amnesia: The Bunker. It felt unbelievably gamey, like massively gamey, just awful. I mean, I'm sure people are going to say, well, at the end of the other Amnesia games, there were things that you could classify as, boss-ish fight type things you had to do and sort out, and I get it, but none of them had me approaching it like the boss fight of a Dark Souls game, okay? I wasn't zerging in there going, okay, this time I'll try that. And, ooh, what happens if I do this? And, that was a terrible way to end any horror game, okay? Especially, though, a bad way to end an Amnesia game, okay? So there you go. Those are the reasons that The Bunker just didn't quite work for me. It wasn't as good as previous Amnesia games. I appreciate that I am the odd one out. Everyone else seems to have loved it. I'm pretty sure the company are going to look at the responses they've gotten and think, well, yeah, this is definitely the way we should take our games. I'm not stupid enough to think otherwise. They're not going to look at one middle-aged gamer and go, well, you know what? We've had massive commercial success over here, but you know what? I just want to make a game that one old man likes, okay? I know that's not going to happen, okay? So I'm not bitter about it. I'm not resentful. I'm just saying it did not work as well for me.